So I'm delighted to be joined by the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng. And obviously, I'm going to talk to you a lot about what's going on here, measures to avert climate catastrophe. But I've got to start with the government's decision to order MPs to vote not to sanction Owen Paterson. You must understand that for many people watching this programme, this looks like the government condoning paid lobbying, what used to be called sleaze.
I don't think it's about that at all. In fact, what happened was that Owen was sanctioned and there was no right of appeal. And what Andrea Leadsome's amendment was trying to do was essentially give some right of appeal in the process. And that's what the vote was. It was a narrow verdict. Of course, I've been here all day, but I did follow closely what was going on.
But have you read the report by the Standards Committee into what Owen Paterson did?
No, I have looked at that, and I'm very conscious of why he was sanctioned in the way it was.
Does, the argument does look compelling. I mean, the committee itself said there was no previous case of paid advocacy where there'd been so many breaches.
So the point about the vote today wasn't to say whether Owen was in the right or in the wrong. What the vote was doing today was to try and bring some due process to where we were. So as of now, he didn't have
but there's never been that right of appeal, and it's assumed, particularly since there are 3 Conservatives on the committee that sanctioned him, it's assumed that the system is a fair one. Why is it now, for the first time, not fair?
You're right to say that there is no right of appeal, and that's exactly the point. What we're saying.
But there's never been a right of appeal, and the system has been, was perfectly all right up until the moment where one of your colleagues was found guilty.
So we've been discussing this actually for quite a while. And the fact that there's never been a right of appeal doesn't make that right. What we want to do is to make an open process where, in any workplace up and down the land, you would have a right of appeal, and we're trying to bring that in this situation.
But you must recognise, particularly with the Labour Party and the SNP saying they are now not going to participate in the committee that's going to try and overhaul the system, that all of this, and it's so important to have a disciplinary system, will now look illegitimate to most people.
I don't think so. I mean, as you say, it's going to be a cross-party commission. That's what we wanted.
But the other parties are not participating.
They've said what they've said. That might change. But actually, what they do can't deflect from the fact that the process needed to be changed, and that's where Andrea Leadsome's amendment came in.
Now, I do want to get on to climate change. You've announced today that companies will have to disclose how they are achieving net zero by 2050.
Yeah.
If they don't disclose, what sanctions are there?
Well, in the first instance, as I think you've pointed out, what we're doing is trying to make them commit publicly to a method of getting there.
But and as of now,
there aren't any government-imposed sanctions. But you will understand. I mean, you're a financial reporter. Investors will judge those companies. Investors are already judging companies on their commitments to decarbonise. And there will be a premium, I'm sure, on companies that do disclose a path to net zero by 2050, as against those who don't.
But, I mean, you're also a sophisticated person, and you'll be aware that without sanctions, there will be big sums of capital which will back stuff that is destroying the planet. I mean, over the past year, the price of, for example, coal miners has soared.
I actually have a slightly different view. I think, and this conference has shown, that there's huge investor appetite in terms of decarbonising the economy. There's a huge premium, actually, on companies, on businesses that are showing a way forward in terms of decarbonising, that are embracing the net zero agenda. And actually what I'm hearing from investors today is that there is a penalty that's going to be paid by companies that don't take climate change seriously and don't decarbonise.
But, as we all know, there's also money that, will chase even polluting businesses because they see a quick turn.
And the other thing that you've, of course, forgotten about this is that we do have mandatory TCFD climate disclosures that will be mandatory by 2025. So that's the other side of what you're talking about.
But it's about disclosures rather than penalties.
Yeah, there'll be disclosures, there'll be transparency, and that ultimately, actually, is how we're going to drive investor behaviour. We're already doing that.
Now, I want to talk about methane.
Yeah.
We've signed up to 30% methane reductions along with the rest of the world.
Sure.
Now, those scientists who know what we've been up to say, actually, there isn't an easy way any longer for us to do it because we haven't got a lot of methane leakage from,
Sure.
oil and gas. So they say this will require us actually to change our farming and to be less dependent on beef farming.
Well, I think that there are huge implications, actually, from the decarbonisation agenda across all these different sectors.
Including agriculture.
Including agriculture. And that's one of the significant things about the COP. I saw in your introductory, what are we achieving? Actually, at this COP, this is the first conference of its kind, which has actually taken a really close sectoral look at decarbonisation. And you're quite right, agriculture is a key part of that, as is electricity, steel, and road transport. That's another thing that we want to see marked improvement on.
I mean, one of the things I did mention in the introduction is that it's plainly harder to achieve what we want to achieve, particularly in respect of reducing the use of coal-fired power stations, if we haven't got China or the president here. Now, back in 2015, one of the reasons why Paris was so successful is you had a sort of coalition of poorer countries who wanted these targets of 2% and 1.5%. And with France, they basically went to China and they went to America and said, you've got to do this. And China did it. This time, poorer countries are not ganging up against China and telling them to act. They're actually ganging up against us and telling us they want more money from us to help them adapt. So why didn't Boris Johnson earlier do much more work in raising money from rich countries to help poorer countries?
So that's one of the successes I wanted to come on to this.
Yeah.
In terms of the financing, just this week, we've had huge increases in financing commitments to the 100 billion a year, which was signed up not at Paris, but 11 years ago. I think it was Copenhagen.
2009,
That's exactly right, 12 years ago. And for the first time in those 12 years, we've actually got a coalition of countries together that are signed up to the 100 billion. And I think that's deliverable.
So do you think we will? Because this is quite important. So obviously Germany and Canada recently told the UK it won't happen until 2023. Do you think it'll happen in 2022? Or do you know that it'll happen in 2022?
I don't know anything, because obviously we've got another 2 weeks of discussions and negotiations. But I think there's a good chance that we will come up with something meaningful on the climate finance piece. And that's something which has eluded us for 12 years. So it would be a big achievement if we land it. I don't know whether we will, but I think there's every chance that we might.
Now, finally, as you know, a little bit of controversy since we're talking about coal, about this proposed new mine in Cumbria.
Yeah.
Why didn't you just take the decision and just say, enough's enough, we're not doing it?
So you know about the process. You also know that it's a planning issue, which is going to the relevant
not to do
the relevant planning
think.
authority.
Tell me what you personally
think. I've said that we have a commitment, obviously, to net zero. We want to decarbonise. The coal mining question isn't for electricity production. It's used in industrial processes. And the issue there, as you will know, is that if we don't produce the industrial coal, we'll have to import it. So it's a more difficult situation than simply taking coal off the electricity.
But just to be clear, normally what happens, let's just say they say yes through the planning process, it'll still probably come back to you. At that point, will you veto it?
It'll come back actually to the local government secretary. Which is what
so
it
what
did
will you
last
advise
time.
him to
Which
do?
is what it
will
did
you
last
advise
time.
him to say yes or no?
Just a technical point, and it is a planning matter. So it's not
You're dodging it.
We've established it's not my department, and also it's a planning issue. So it's not something that I can directly comment on.
Kwasi, good to see you.
Thank you. Very good to see you.
Come back soon.
Thank you.
Joining me now.